Exposing a child under the age of 3 to a screen, I'm not afraid to say it, it's downright criminal. But parents don't know it, but it's downright criminal. That is to say, at the level of the synaptic connections in the development of vision, sleep and wake rhythms, it's very, very, very disturbing. In fact, a child needs natural light, needs to develop motor skills with a three-dimensional view of their environment. Tablets and phones are very close. So it's extremely harmful. It's really a hold-up on the brain. There's a hypnotic effect. And so these are children who are cut off from their bodies, cut off from their appetites. They are cut off from their sensations. And so actually it goes against the autonomy we seek. Then he's super aggressive. He's like a lion in a cage. He's very upset. Talking to a child about oral sex and other sexual practices won't protect them from abuse. You're already abusing them, meaning that you're shocking them with something they are not mature enough to process. And since they will have heard about it, there's a risk that when an adult wants to try it with him, to say, oh yes, I know, oh well, I'll try. The words to say are simple and they should be said as early as possible. I did it as soon as my children were in the bath, and we talked when they were 1.5 years old. I started explaining to them, here is your body belongs to you. No one has the right to touch your body. Even the doctor has to ask you, that's it. 50% of young people who watch porn say they repeat the violent acts they see because they are completely cut off from their capacity for empathy. So in fact, they don't process it, they swallow it whole, and so they express it whole. And that's what's extremely worrying.
Marie-Estelle Dupont, hello.
Hello?
We are very happy to have you here on the Antithesis channel. So before we start, I remind our listeners not to forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on the bell to make sure they don't miss our updates. It's free and it helps us a lot. Also follow us on our other channels, Instagram, TikTok, or Spotify. Thank you very much for your support. Marie-Estelle Dupont, could you briefly introduce yourself?
So thank you for your invitation, first of all. Yes, I am Marie-Estelle Dupont. I am 42 years old. I am a mother of 3 children. I am a clinical psychologist and psychotherapist. I've been practicing for 18 years as a private practitioner. I worked at the hospital at the end of my studies, and then I left the hospital in 2009 when a law was passed in France that started to heavily bureaucratize the hospital. So I actually didn't find myself in my practice and decided to only do private practice. And then on the side, I have a writing activity, so I've published 5 books in the field of psychology, and I take the role of the management of a collection with a French publisher this year called Albin Michel, where I published a book called The Anti-Mother, and now we are going to launch a new psychology collection.
And which psychological orientation particularly inspired you during your career?
Well, I had the chance to study at a school that was based on competitive entry and which made us aware of many approaches. So on one hand, there was the discovery for me of neuropsychology and all the discoveries about the brain, which really fascinated me. And then in terms of psychotherapy, I was very inspired by 2 approaches, Jungian psychology. Jung actually practiced at Burgosli, which was a Swiss hospital, and psychosomatics, the French school of psychosomatics, really developed all the connections between the body and the psyche with a very holistic view of the person. And this leads me to support many people with chronic illnesses and to make the connection between their emotional functioning and their bodily responses.
Many of our listeners, viewers, certainly discovered you during the COVID crisis. You spoke out to denounce a number of measures taken by the governments. What led you to speak out critically at that time?
So, in reality, my presence in the media was not anticipated or planned at all. We were all caught off guard. In fact, in France, on March 16th, 2020, lockdown, life stops. At that moment, I was about to give birth to my last 2 children. I already had a little boy, and the television called me. I was certainly in their database because I had already published books. And actually, they asked me to come to the news broadcast to help the population react to the lockdown and how to talk to children, etc. and it snowballed from there. Little by little, I was recruited by different channels and found myself on several radios and multiple television stations. And actually, when the lockdown and health measures came in, there was a moment of realization for me. I thought we are heading towards total control of the population, which will cause enormous psychological damage because everyone will be treated the same way, and children and students will suffer enormously at a key moment in their development. They need social interactions, these measures. So I fear very significant collateral damage. I was afraid of it. Unfortunately, my fears were below the reality of what was going to happen, especially with the wave of child and adolescent psychiatric issues we saw starting in February 2021. So I tried to alert the media to actually raise awareness of this psychological dimension and that health can't be reduced to the circulation of a virus, that health is bigger than that. We saw increases in suicide attempts and suicides quite quickly, a lot of burnout, a lot of anxious, depressive syndromes. So I tried to report this data.
All that you have seen in practice, on a daily basis, right?
That I saw in my office daily, which was confirmed in hospitals. That is to say, what we saw in the city was the same as in the hospital, at Necker Hospital, which is a large Parisian hospital that takes care of children. We had over 600% more admissions of children in child psychiatry. There you have it. We really saw significant psychological damage.
And it was damages linked to what? The masks? The anxiety of the moment?
So there were several things. There were first the lockdowns that obviously made intrafamilial violence explode, meaning that families that were somewhat dysfunctional but managed thanks to support, like the soccer club, socialization, etc. From the moment they were in closed quarters, there was an explosion of alcoholism in one parent, or violence, or parents who were ill and not monitored anymore. So they were no longer taking their treatment, and as a result, an increase in abuse. I had a patient whose father had been removed from the family unit before the lockdown because he was incestuous, and who was then confined again with his wife and children. So we can well imagine the social and psychological dramas that this could have caused. Battered women, for instance, who had no refuge, who couldn't go to friends' houses. So there was this increasing violence, and then there was for babies, children, students who had in their vital needs going to class, having social interactions, playing sports, ultimately a withdrawal and isolation that was dangerous. At 45 years old, not going to a restaurant or to the movies doesn't matter. However, when you're a student and can't question a professor, being stuck behind a screen all day, it's obvious that addictions explode, it's obvious that depressions explode. Suicide attempts have increased a lot. And today we still have not come out of it. That is to say, we think that because the measures have been lifted, the damage has stopped, except that when you have been stopped mid-flight in your growth, there is lasting damage. So the children who are entering first grade or babies who had language delays due to the mask, who are starting preschool, etc., these are children who have missed something in their development, and the human being grows with sensitive periods, and when something is missed at a crucial moment, it's difficult and takes a long time to recover. So today, in fact, we still see the effects in our practices.
And when you said that in the media, how was it? What was the atmosphere like on those sets? There was also, I imagine, a lot of, well, you faced strong opposition.
Yes, because if you will, we are in a society governed by algorithms. So when a clinician comes and talks about something from clinical experience, as long as there are no statistical studies with figures to back up what they say, it has no value, except that when the alarm is raised, we don't have the numbers yet, and when we get the numbers, it's already too late. When we said, watch out for this segment of the population, this is going to happen. For the elderly, there will be decline syndromes. As I say, we still had some control, except that when you're told, but you do not have the figures, you know nothing, you have a professional bias because you only see people who are doing poorly in your work, and we wait for the figures once we have the statistics 3 years later. Unfortunately, if the statistics confirm what we say, the damage is done. And the speech delays, they are there, and the teenagers who committed suicide, we cannot bring them back. So there was this suspicion related to the fact that that many doctors are now used to only responding to statistics because their training means they are no longer taught philosophy, they are no longer taught ultimately everything that is clinical and everything that is human. So they train them with multiple choice questionnaires, and consequently they no longer manage to have a holistic and global view of human health in its environment. So things that are obvious and seem to be common sense completely escape them because they have a very fragmented view of reality, and they look at mere numbers of viral circulation. They don't look at a family's health. And then the journalists, they were on TV sets all the time, so they were not confined. They didn't necessarily realize what was happening to people who were really facing the full impact of the measures, what it's like to work from home when you're a couple in Paris with 2 young children in 60 square meters. And so a 3-year-old child is in front of a screen all day. So not perceiving it, they told us we were being alarmist, that we were exaggerating. I had journalists who said, oh yes, it's the doomsday psychologist, etc. So I was considered the alarmist. Today, unfortunately, the same journalists acknowledge that mental health is a national cause recognized by the government, that there is a real problem because of psychotropics, which are consumed twice as much as in 2019 by young people. But the day it is recognized, unfortunately, the damage is already done. But at the time, there was resistance because the focus was so much on COVID itself that everything else about health was overlooked.
Were there also media pressures to maintain a certain narrative within the media?
Oh yes, of course. That is to say, there were editorial rooms where it was made very clear, more to journalists than to external contributors. But still, it was said, be careful not to sow confusion in people's minds by going too against the government's word. So the salaried journalist is very troubled because he has a real conflict of interest. We, as external contributors, had the freedom to say, well, no, I do not want to go against my ethics and professional conduct. So if I cannot say what I see, I will not go. But indeed, for some journalists who might have wanted to say something perhaps contrary to the accepted opinions, it was very complicated situations of censorship. In fact, we cannot.
And were you also affected by that? Were you actually censored at times?
For me, there was a network that asked me not to use certain words. And then there were channels where I know what I said displeased them, but they didn't stop me from saying it. I experienced a bit of everything, actually, because I appeared in many different media. So there are media outlets that stopped inviting me. There are media outlets that contradicted me, but let me speak. There are media outlets that said, we cannot use those words because people will no longer understand. There was a bit of everything, but yes, there are editorial teams that ask you to commit to not going against the official narrative.
It was particularly intense, I imagine, at the time when we were talking about the health pass or vaccination.
Of course, yes. At the time of the health pass saying it's blackmail, as I said, it's blackmail being exercised, especially on the younger ones who are not affected by the disease. We can't stop teenagers from playing sports on the pretext that the parents didn't want to inject them. Yes, I was obviously labeled a conspiracy theorist. I was labeled a right-wing extremist psychologist. Really nothing to do with the matter. In fact, I was stating facts with no intention of destabilizing anyone. And those whom it bothered categorized me in a way that made my speech seem dangerous.
Did you receive apologies from journalists or colleagues who might have spoken badly of you during that period?
No, definitely not. But in France, we don't look back at the COVID period. We keep moving forward in the media. So we're on to the next issue. There's very, very little, there's starting to be a bit of mea culpa from some who admit there are things they didn't say because they had directives or fears. But on the other hand, when you are treated like I was on the sets, as sentimental and giving lectures, etc. Obviously, I didn't get any apologies, but I don't care personally. What bothers me is those who tried to be helpful towards vulnerable people, babies, the young, and so on, women who gave birth while wearing a mask. We still did it. We actually prevented people from burying their dead. I mean, those people, I didn't really manage to help them. As for someone apologizing to me when they say something really foolish, I don't attach importance to that kind of talk, so it's not a big deal. What is serious is that no apologies were made to the people who were harmed.
And today, indeed, everyone seems to have somewhat forgotten those 2 years of crisis, right? No one seems to want to talk about it anymore, as if it were a taboo subject. So why, in your opinion, and can we consider it a phenomenon of traumatic amnesia at a societal level?
There was a collective trauma. Life came to a halt. Familiar landmarks shattered, and from one day to the next, people had no control over their existence. So there was a collective trauma. To acknowledge the existence of a collective trauma, one must somehow be able to change the situation in the present. And today I think there are several factors that make us avoid thinking about it. First, there's an element of shame, very important. We would feel too guilty. There is something of humiliation in realizing that we were manipulated, that we were lied to. Then there are people who are still under the regime of fear, who have not come out of this shock due to fear, since for there to be trauma, there must be shock. For there to be shock, there must be fear. So there are those who have not come out of it. There are those who are a bit embarrassed to admit they got fooled because it bruises the ego a little. There are those who are ashamed because they realize they have caused harm while thinking they were doing good. Whether they are doctors, teachers, etc., who believed they were faithfully applying directives and now realize there are negative consequences. So I think there are several factors, and that in France, in any case, the population experiences so many successive acts of violence, one after the other. Today we have rampant inflation, and there are very significant economic concerns. There is increasing street violence, and somehow people are caught in a sort of headlong rush where they can no longer settle down. As we go from crisis to crisis, from disaster to disaster, they can no longer settle down and process what they have experienced, actually. And then there's another factor at play, which is the decline in education. When you have no understanding of philosophy, when you don't know what totalitarianism is, when you have no notion of history, you don't see the mechanisms at work. And what I say in my book is that COVID should actually serve as a paradigm for us. The way the crisis was managed, I'm not talking about the disease itself, I don't have scientific expertise on the virus, I'm not questioning the virus, but the management of the crisis should serve as a paradigm for us to understand how today, in Western societies, we want to provide a standardized, centralized and totalitarian response to all problems, to all issues that arise in a society, whether ecological, economic, health-related, etc. And if people look back on COVID and understand the strings we activated, fear, ostracization, etc., etc. The division, the split within families, the company that takes over from the government to impose measures, etc. We will understand what happens when we want to resolve the climate crisis, geopolitical crisis, etc., etc. And if people don't do this introspective work, they risk being manipulated again, in fact.
You used the term totalitarian. So do you think it was a totalitarian period?
The nature of totalitarianism is that it exerts total control and dominates bodies. So I think that in the health crisis we saw totalitarianism in all its scope. That is to say, we bypassed parental authority, we bypassed the social contract based on fundamental freedoms, and we moved to a regime of authorization, where it is normal to have permission to do something, instead of saying fundamental freedoms are not being challenged. And in some cases, here is what is recommended. In a moment of exception, we actually had a questioning of our social contract, of our society, which is based on fundamental freedoms and on dignity of the human being. This dignity disappeared. We were either a positive or negative case. Citizenship was conditional to an injection whose validity was 3 months. So the social contract was redefined, but without warning and without asking the people. Health was redefined, which is defined by the World Health Organization as a state of overall balance, psychological, physical and social. The definition of health was changed to a number of viral circulation. You were healthy if you avoided a virus. In fact, this system of substitution, without asking people's opinion, is totalitarianism. When you exert control over bodies, it is totalitarianism.
And what does this reveal, according to you, about the general state of Western societies? How were we ultimately able to get to this point, to finally accept these types of deviations that you describe?
So I think there are many factors, and in reality, it would be a mistake to think that COVID was the beginning of something. I think the management of COVID is the culmination of something that has been there since for 40 years, but even well before that. We might even have to go back to the moment when Husserl speaks of the substitution of scientific positivism in place of philosophy in Western societies. It's very important because, in fact, for me, it is the beginning of the desacralization and despiritualization of the West. However, a population that no longer has transcendence is a psychically vulnerable population. Because as long as you have hope, as long as you believe that something surpasses you, you cannot grant absolute power to something human, whether it's an ideology, whether it's technology, whether it's doctors, whether it's politics. You know that there is something above, but if there is something above, it also means that life is sacred. So there are things you will not tolerate. So there is the despiritualization that has played a role, which has made it so that since human beings need to believe, as proven by all ethology studies, in fact, mammals need to believe that something good exists, even a little monkey. A little monkey will get depressed if it doesn't have a mother figure, even though it can be okay when temporarily deprived of food. And our societies have tried to redefine humans solely by their material and caloric needs. In fact, during the lockdown, it was like you have food, so everything is fine. And when we define humans solely by their condition somewhere as consumers and taxpayers, we despiritualize them, reducing them to something exclusively material, which makes them very manipulable at first, and which justifies everything is possible if life is no longer sacred. Everything is allowed, everything is permitted. Then the second factor for me that comes right after is the decline in the level of education. For there to be democracy, it takes thinking individuals. To think, you need knowledge. And today, Western societies are both highly bureaucratized and algorithmized. In fact, knowledge no longer has value. That is to say, authority is no longer legitimized by knowledge and understanding. So we were bombarded with truths that were suddenly absolute, whereas the day before, we had been told the opposite, and we were not allowed to discuss it. So in fact, knowledge no longer has value. If knowledge no longer has value, it means that school is a place of conditioning and no longer a place of instruction. And we see it because today, school is no longer a barrier to ideologies. It is porous to ideology in France. All kinds of ideologies. But ideology penetrates the school. Knowledge is no longer at the center. So a population that has... My generation doesn't have much understanding of history. We don't have much understanding of philosophy. We haven't learned much about the totalitarian experience of the 20th century. But on the other hand, we have technological means that allow totalitarianism not to need to rely on police in the streets, even though we have had police in the streets. So that also makes people vulnerable. Less knowledge means less critical thinking, and therefore less perspective on what we are told. So there is a major hold by news channels that repeat very anxiety-inducing things in a loop. So there are already these two factors, spirituality and knowledge. And then I think a lot has been based on the fear of ostracization and the need to belong. The Milgram experiment shows that in a given population, around 85% of people will adhere to the dominant discourse, as soon as it is assumed by a person in a position of authority and rationalized in the name of good. So basically, you can make almost anyone who is not a psychopath, who is an average lambda citizen, do just about anything as long as you explain that it is for the good of the community. And ultimately, the authority, which gives the instruction, in a way assumes the responsibility that people will abandon their moral sense and superego and can carry out completely absurd actions. And we saw that, well, in France we had people we thought were nice who started denouncing students, etc., etc. So critical thinking will be upheld by a minority of people who, they will say, well, it doesn't matter if I'm the only one thinking the way I do, it doesn't matter if temporarily there are things I'm no longer allowed to do. I stick to my convictions, I stick to my perceptions. This is not the majority of people.
And these people, what sets them apart? What is it?
A stronger anchoring? Is it a different education? These 15%.
There are several factors. There is obviously moral strength, the ability to rely on oneself and to endure solitude. There is the aspect of having understood and analyzed the mechanisms at work in all situations of control. When you have faced a family with control issues, where there is manipulation, there is blackmail, where lies become the truth, where good becomes evil, and evil becomes good. If you have analyzed it, if you have zoomed out, when you face it again, you have an immunity, you recognize it.
Which was your case.
Which was my case.
You mentioned it in your book.
I was locked up by a completely psychopathic mother. So when I saw that children were being locked up, I was very scared for them because I thought society is becoming a toxic family. With the young people, actually, we are no longer helpful. Normally, when there is a war, there are charters for the protection of minors. And we were told we were at war against the virus and there was no protection for minors. While it was not a pediatric disease. So when you were exposed to it, if you analyzed it, you have immunity. If you haven't been exposed, you are vulnerable. If you have been exposed but haven't come out of it, well, you will be a little bit like a cult victim. You will let yourself manipulated by fear, actually. There are also spiritual resources. Ultimately, people who believed in something greater, fear did not take hold of them. There you go. Then there's also strength of character.
And in this sense, we can also consider that this COVID period was an awakening opportunity for many, and that today, a greater number of people who became aware of the issues during this time will no longer be fooled, so to speak.
I think for a certain number of people, there was a disillusionment, painful but salutary, both from the political class and the media class. That is to say, where they maybe sometimes let their judgment slip a little, they said to themselves, but we still need to be careful. The state is not necessarily always our friend, and they really experienced it firsthand. They experienced it concretely, since parental authority was confiscated, etc., and families were taken hostage. So yes, among a certain number of people, there was a brutal awakening, and then there are people who could not have tolerated this confrontation with the painful truth that the state does not necessarily want what is best for me, and who have themselves plunged into denial because they might not have been psychologically equipped enough to face that. And ultimately, a human being in adolescence is supposed to somewhat de-idealize their parents to keep what corresponds to them and question what does not. People who couldn't do that have difficulty doing it later with their boss or with the state. They have trouble maintaining freedom, a critical mind, and saying, I accept this, I don't accept that.
At a more individual level, you mentioned trauma. Can we perhaps revisit this idea of trauma, what a trauma is, and ultimately how we identify them on an individual level? It might be useful for people listening to think, okay, maybe I've never done psychotherapy. How can I identify that?
So a trauma, by definition, whether a physical trauma, a shock, or a psychological trauma, is what breaks through. The trauma is what disrupts an individual's balance. By breaching its boundaries, exceeding its limits, it surpasses its capacity for adaptation and emotional regulation. We all have a window of tolerance for stress, in which one can be activated without being traumatized. You are preparing for a competition. On the day of the competition, you are stressed, your heart races a bit, you sweat a little, your thoughts are a bit confused, but you stay within your activation window. You are not traumatized, and after the test, you will be a bit tired, you will sleep, and then you will recover from this stress that was motivating and allowed you to overcome an obstacle in a way that was ultimately beneficial for you. When you exceed your window of stress tolerance because you experience an assault in the street, or because you suddenly learn of someone's death, you step out of your tolerance window, and so you are hyperactivated. That is to say, your brain will send, to overcome the ordeal, a rush of hormones, combat hormones, very important ones. except that if this stress is acute, it's fine. You will calm down and return to normal. If this stress is chronic and repeated, a child who is mistreated in their family, a person who suffers, a person in a country at war who experiences repeated assaults, etc., etc., measures that go against your basic needs, the need to go out, the need to interact with people at an age when it's essential, particularly essential, because it is for everyone. Your brain cannot remain in a state of hyperactivation, because what are you risking? Under the effect of these stress hormones, you risk a stroke. So you've certainly already heard testimonies from people who were raped and who tell you, at some point I had a blackout and I split myself.
Dissociation.
And I saw myself. I saw the scene and I couldn't react. Why can't the person react? Because in fact, if they react, they risk being killed by the attacker. It's also a protection mechanism, dissociation. And in fact, at that moment, there are other hormones that take over, which encapsulate the fight hormones to silence them, which will be numbing hormones, like a drug. Your body manufactures. Nature is well made. Your body manufactures anesthesia. It's ketamine. These are hormones that function like morphine. You are cut off from your feelings. You can't, you know you need to defend yourself, but you can't do it. You're under anesthesia. And actually, it was believed that children adapted, but they don't complain. At their age, the mask is a game. They are very happy not to go to school, whereas, in fact, they were in hypoactivation, meaning I have no control over the situation. I am 8 years old. I cannot confront my father or my mother. I cannot escape school. So I go into hypoactivation. I don't make waves. I don't smile anymore. Don't talk anymore. Don't laugh anymore. Don't feel anything anymore. Because I have no hold, no way to escape. So if I have no way to escape, I simply have to protect myself from pain. And so in children, we confuse the fact that they adapt with the fact that they over-adapt. Adaptation is very good. We all need it. Making a little effort at school to bear not choosing the neighbor you sit next to is good. Over-adaptation is very dangerous because, in fact, they have cut off their needs. They have cut off their perception. To avoid being in conflict with authority figures and attachment figures whom they vitally need for their survival. And as a result, it left scars. These are children who no longer want to go to school, children who no longer have an appetite, children who have nightmares. Except at the time, we didn't see that they were traumatized. There are adults and even doctors who said, well, no, you see, they have no symptoms. They are doing very well. So it's important to identify someone traumatized can function perfectly normally. They are like a robot. The person is adapted. But there's emotional anesthesia. She no longer feels emotion. She no longer has pleasure. She no longer has desire. And then there are also more obvious symptoms, evidently, which can appear after a rape or after the sanitary measures. There were eating disorders, etc. So there are visible symptoms. It's possible, but don't be deceived. Sometimes trauma manifests as an absence of symptoms with someone who is ultimately completely detached from their emotional life.
Can't we extend this phenomenon to the whole of society? I mean, I feel like there are more and more people who don't care anymore about what might happen to them, who have this kind of indifference.
So, actually, we saw this quite early in France. For me, we saw it as early as 2021. That is to say, there was such nervous exhaustion because the measures, everything was changing all the time. The protocols in children's schools changed every week. So, imagine for the teachers. So, in fact, we shuffled the benchmarks so much, we constantly changed the support points for people that from 2021, there was no more anger. Well, in a minority of the population, there was anger, obviously, but among many people I heard, no, but it's fine, I don't understand anything anymore. I stopped thinking, I just do what I'm told. So we had moved to hypoactivation with resigned people. But since they were detached from their emotions, they were also detached from the necessary emotions to social unity. These emotions, it's empathy. It's being helpful to children we see suffering or to elderly people who are dying of grief. It's also being angry when something is legalized but not legitimate. And in fact, when we're dissociated, we no longer have these reflexes. The dissociated mother, she doesn't protect her little one because she no longer feels anger if it gets harmed. She no longer feels empathy. So that's the danger of having a dissociated population. A dissociated population is
And
robotic
thus
and can do anything.
manipulable.
And it is manipulable.
And to get out of that, what is the process to heal from it, both individually and socially?
I am a psychotherapist. I can help people heal from individual traumas. If I had the means to heal French society, my God, how happy I would be. Unfortunately, French society is sick and traumatized, and I do not have the key. What is certain is that the answer will not come. One should never think that the one who traumatized you will heal you from the trauma they inflicted. I'm just saying, individually, first, you need to identify the trauma, meaning you need it to be attested, authenticated with the person who experienced this trauma. If you will, as long as you have experienced the trauma and those around you say, but no, it's not serious, we've been through worse, but you know, there are other people who have experienced similar things, they've recovered very well. You are in denial of the suffering. As long as you are in denial of the suffering, the person re-traumatizes you. So our role as therapists is to acknowledge the suffering, not to ask the person to justify themselves. Did it feel like violence to you? Maybe for someone else, it wouldn't have felt like violence. For you, it did, and that's okay. Now, how does it make you feel? What are you going to make out of it? There you go. So it's not about returning you to your previous state. It's about how you're going to transform it, to integrate it into your life experience and have a traumatic growth. It's not, I'm going to cancel, you're going to return to the next state, I'm going to cancel the rape, I'm going to cancel the loss, I'm going to cancel the abuse. No, it's we're going to integrate it. It won't stun you anymore. It won't make you lose your composure. So we're going to have techniques to emotionally unload. And this life experience, it is part of your life story. It contributes to who you are or who you are becoming. What do you do with it? I have a lot of contact with a young woman who was raped a little over a year ago by an obligation to exit French territory and who created an association to help victims of street violence. For her, resilience is that. It's, I can't go back to before. This fear now, it's in me, but I transform it by trying to help others. So actually, the real idea for healing is how I overcome it in a traumatic growth, how I integrate my experience. For me, the experience of family abuse, I transformed it. I wrote a book, I support people. And today, I'm no longer afraid of that. It no longer destroys my self-esteem. There you go. So, we release the trauma, we can't erase it, and we transform it.
Maybe a lot of people, let's say, make a lack of distinction between resilience and trauma. So how to distinguish those two?
Between resilience and adaptation, yes, of course.
Sorry.
That's why I was coming back to the fact that you shouldn't be fooled by an absence of symptoms. Someone who is overly adapted is often someone who is traumatized because they want to please, because they are afraid of being rejected, afraid of being humiliated. And so he will over-adapt to demands that go against his needs. And he will function like a robot. And so people will say he is resilient, whereas in fact, the person is completely disconnected from themselves.
Well, it seems that many people have traumas, I think, more or less significant in their lives. There have been problems. From what point can we consider someone as normal, in quotes? What is a normal human being? Where is the marker of normality?
So first, how do we consider someone cured? We consider someone cured when they are no longer dissociated from their emotions and the trauma does not control them. That is to say, a woman is healed from a rape when she can resume the course of a normal emotional and sexual life and not see every man as a rapist. As long as she is still driven by the trauma, she will keep this fear. A normal human being, that's a difficult question. We can say a healthy human being. It is a human being capable of love and work. That is to say, it is a human being capable of forming emotional bonds because we need bonds for our survival. So if we cannot form emotional bonds, ultimately, there is a need we cannot satisfy. So forming bonds. Emotional bonds and not just social connections, truly emotional bonds, and then being able to work, that is to say, to adapt to external reality and transform it, to find a balance between what I endure from external reality and how I transform it.
So you also emphasize in your book that Western societies are harmful to children. Now, we've already mentioned some elements, probably, but could you further elaborate on why they are harmful?
What is very striking is that I think the collective psyche and humanity in general still have a lot of work to do. We have started one, but we have not finished this work of maturity that allows the child to have their rightful place. I am not saying they had it in the Middle Ages, but we still have a lot of work to do because we are in societies that claim, that have the pretension to call themselves progressive. In my view, they are quite obscurantist societies because they do not accept the scientific reality that a child is not an adult. And a child is a person, not an adjustment variable. It is a being in full development and totally dependent, who therefore cannot be left to his own devices by allowing him everything, without any framework and without any prohibition, because he does not know what to do with his freedom. His freedom overwhelms him. Freedom needs to be practiced, and for that, discernment is necessary. And who is also not a martyr child, who would be the... Who would be, yes, the adjustment variable or the property of their parents. We haven't yet found the right place for the child because I believe it's difficult for us to accept that we owe them everything and that their needs are our responsibilities, that a human baby needs their mother. There's no point in telling lies by thinking it's great to entrust your child at 2.5 months. The human baby needs its mother, and in reality, the mother needs her baby. She is hormonally programmed to want to take care of her baby, but they put in her head that being a free and independent woman means leaving the child at daycare and quickly returning to work. But in fact, maybe that's not human well-being. Maybe human well-being is that during the first months of the child's life, the mother should have no other concerns other than recovering from childbirth and taking care of her baby's needs. It is not degrading, it is actually the transmission of life, and it is very beautiful. So I think we struggle in our societies to give due importance to the needs of the child, which will gradually allow them to become autonomous. But the brain develops until the age of 24. So when I hear people telling me, are your children independent? Well, they are 4.5 years old, so overall they are not independent, no? And it's very good that they are not independent, and we see it in the absolutely shameful care of toddlers. Today we have 1 adult for 8 children in public nurseries. We see this in schools where, in fact, if we follow the discoveries of neuroscience and the development of intelligence, current preschools are unsuitable. Abstract intelligence, it develops after concrete intelligence. That means thought is an internalized action, and in order to think and manipulate concepts, which are abstract objects, the child must have interacted with the real world. The child is a being with 5 senses, and so if we put them in a class with the prohibition to move, they cannot develop their intelligence. At 3 years old, a little boy or girl needs to move, to understand rhythms, to orient themselves in space, to control, to master the physical and domestic environment, to manage frustration, to be patient, to be proud of themselves. And when you see that a child is capable of doing household chores, studies today show that you realize later on they will be a student with better academic performance, they will be more patient. If they are more patient, they are more likely to handle difficult learning. And he will have more self-confidence, so he will reach out more to others. Therefore, he will have better socialization. And today, schools have been created where basically 3-year-old children are allowed to move during the 15-minute break. It's absurd.
So they're already starting to do little math calculations depending on the classes, depending on the countries, or it's directly in abstraction as well.
Yes, while you can very well learn mathematics with objects, with cubes of different sizes, teach you proportions. Look, in this cube, I can put 2 cubes like this. So we should actually go back to the child's development stage, the intelligence described by Piaget, etc., by many psychologists. We have a lot of material. That's what's unfortunate, that we don't use it. Intelligence is first sensory motor, and only later does it become abstract and logico-mathematical.
That's what some alternative pedagogies have understood. Notably, we were talking aside about Montessori, Steiner and others.
Yeah, so the discoveries of Maria Montessori are incredible because this woman who was a psychiatrist working with disabled children realized that with the pedagogy she developed for disabled children, the children who weren't disabled, learned better and faster with that method than the children who were in the traditional system. And in fact, she started from the principle that education should be an aid to life and that to build peace in society, we must teach the child collaboration with adults and peers right away and not competition. So, actually, in a Montessori kindergarten class, children will be encouraged to work with the teacher and with their peers. They will not be sitting alone at a desk with a teacher comparing each child's work without allowing the children to interact. And this actually gives them self-confidence. And there is a system of mutual trust with the adult who is a person of authority, but authority in the noblest sense. I have authority over my children because I am at the service of my child. I must raise them, not crush them. I must educate them to discernment and the demand for freedom. I must not subdue them. There you go. And I think that, in fact, in France, we have shifted from authority that uplifted with a school that allowed for all classes of society to acquire knowledge and rise in society. That was the time of my grandfather. He benefited from the social elevator. He came from a very, very low class. He succeeded because his teacher taught him mathematics, and so he was able to have a great career. Today, we want to level everything down so as not to make it difficult for struggling students. But on the other hand, we are in coercion. You will not step out of your chalk circle in the yard because the virus is circulating. So we've replaced structuring prohibitions with prohibitions that are destructive, degrading, and subduing prohibitions, whereas a prohibition should raise them. The limitation I set as a mother is one I also impose on myself, and it is by example that my child benefits from my authority. And today, we have shifted into authoritarianism, and that's what I regret.
With also currently a breakup of traditional social structures, especially at the family level. So, without making a value judgment, I think it's a clear observation in our Western societies, and this breakup of the traditional family ultimately, what impact does it have on the child's development for you?
In fact, when you look at the evolution of society, at the moment when the consumer society, in fact, after the War of 40, there is hope that never again there will be totalitarianism and never again will there be dictatorship, because technological progress is politically neutral, ideologically neutral, and will bring us democracy, growth, freedom, etc., except that we will shift into a consumer society whose mantra is enjoy without restraint. Enjoy without restraint means not setting prohibitions. Not setting prohibitions means not setting limits. If for adults everything is allowed, how do we educate children? So already at that moment we deny the generational difference. The 1970s, everything is permitted, it's so that adults allow themselves things forbidden with minors. So we enjoy without hindrance, we break the generational difference. And we break the father's image. But when we break the father's image in the name of patriarchy, it's not good. In reality, a pathway is created for the state to have control over the child's education. If the father, who represents the superego, the law, adaptation to the outside world, social rules, because he himself submits to them, etc., is sidelined and it is said, no, but we don't need a father to have children. Who is on the front line? Who will be in danger? Who is the figure that will be attacked next? The mother. And today, here we are, we have broken the father. We said, it's fine, women can handle everything. As a result, women end up with a crazy mental load. And so, inevitably, they are less inclined to have children because when you have to do everything, perform economically, educate the children, and remain feminine, it's overwhelming. And once the woman is vulnerable, because she is alone and isolated with the child, the state, marketing, advertising, the outside world have even more influence on the family. The walls of the family, the walls of the home, they're actually falling. And that's what we're witnessing, meaning it's all well and good to want to break the image of the father, but then you're going to break the image of the mother. and it's the child who pays the price, because they get less attention, because a mom who is all alone can't do everything. Obviously, it is better to have a mom alone than a mom who stays with a violent father who hits her. But when we break this idea of mutual inclusion and complementarity between a man and a woman, we expose the child to being extremely susceptible to external ideologies, because in fact we tell them, no. But anyway, roots, traditions, memories are worthless. And so you will be recreated according to the transhumanist fantasy of the new man, but accept that you can only free yourself from what you know. So a child will only be able to break away from a possibly very imperfect or even very toxic family environment if he knows it, its origins, only if he knows his history. And today we are in a movement where, by breaking the family, by saying that traditions are worthless, and by making reality uniform with ideology, the child is prevented from being truly free. They are prevented from dialoguing, from engaging in conflicts, from saying this I take, this I don't take, and a war is created between generations.
Wasn't there still a need to question this masculine, violent, dominant figure, etc., for the well-being of the family at some point?
Questioning is essential. But here, it's not about questioning. Here, we're putting in young people's minds that having children is bad, that in the name of ecology, it's better to abstain. It's not that there were stages in evolution with their downsides, matriarchy, with its downsides in certain primitive societies. Patriarchy obviously has its downsides. But the problem is that here we are not questioning, we are not refining, we are not improving. It's all well and good to destroy, but what are we proposing afterward? And rather than saying everything is bad in patriarchy, I would like us to also realize that we have somewhat confused patriarchy with consumer society. In fact, it is not the fact that the father has an effective say in the family that is respected, which is dangerous. It is the fact that society asks women to be in companies where they have to behave like men to be recognized. That's ultra-toxic. That's very dangerous. So actually, I think there's a confusion between certain things in the traditional model that weren't to be discarded, that needed improvement, but weren't necessarily to be discarded, and an ultra-violent economic system, where in fact men can no longer economically support a family when their mother has just had a child. And as a result, women are asked to be everywhere at once, and the complementarity between man and woman is no longer allowed. And today, we have women who are forced to behave like men to the detriment of their health.
I don't know if I was clear.
Absolutely. And to this is added an entire electronic environment. There are screens that are added, which also didn't exist before and are often considered a tool to calm a child who can't be calmed. So an iPad is put in their hands at 3 years old. That too, in the end, what do you think about this digitization of society in relation to the development of the child?
It contributes to disembodiment. I would just like to finish before closing the parenthesis on the previous question. I also think there was a problem, which is that on one side, women have been emancipated, and it's obviously very good that women work, etc., if they wish, but the job is not finished. That is to say, there is a great hypocrisy in liberal society, in the sense that, in reality, if a woman wishes or has to work, the childcare systems are not in place. They are dehumanizing. So there are women who need to work economically, but who know well that the child will be mistreated in daycare. And that always weighs on the mothers. And finally, maybe we went too far in tearing down men instead of making them responsible. But I don't want more feminine men, I want more protective men. And here, I think there was a failure, but the human psyche operates through trial and error. But there was a deadlock, there was a failure. We need to be complementary. I always come back to this term rather than in opposition, because we need one another. On screens, in fact, when we are in a consumer society, we do not have time. We aim for performance, we don't have time, and now there's inflation, so the TV will serve as a nanny because it's too expensive to have a nanny. If you have fewer children, you don't have kids playing together. So an only child ends up more in front of a screen. I have twins. Honestly, I hardly ever use cartoons now because they play, they are at the age to play by themselves at 4 years old. They can play while I prepare the meal. So I also think that the more isolated an individual is, the more technology fills a relational void. And finally today, a mother in a big city, she does not have the support of her family, her fathers do not have the time. The neighborhood does not know each other. The support structures are not adequate. And so she struggles to spend time with her child, or the father struggles to spend time. They spend more time than dads did before, but play, so essential for a child's development in today's society, has little space because there are economic constraints and demands for a certain performance that affect family time. We can clearly see the curves compared to the 1960s. Family time is less significant. And then it is impoverished, meaning family time is not sitting at the table for an hour and talking. It's more like each of us being in our room with a tablet. Obviously, parents must wage an absolutely open and merciless war against the digital world, because a human being is a physical being. They need their 5 senses to become intelligent. And all the time you spend on a screen when you're little, it's time you don't spend playing. It's time you don't spend laughing. It's time you don't spend doing physical activity. It's time you don't spend developing your self-confidence by learning skills. Because in fact, when you scroll, you don't learn anything, except to compare yourself with people who are not part of your life. Which greatly depreciates your self-esteem. If you go play sports with your friends, you will gain confidence, you will evaluate yourself, you will learn humility, you will learn cooperation. So we must also see that the harm from screens is not just about the screens, but also who generates them. It's also all the time we no longer spend doing things that are essential for child development.
Some will say that if a child doesn't have a screen early on, they won't know how to use it well, or won't be socialized because their friends will have one, especially at a certain age, from 10 or 12 years old, and that they might be marginalized.
And we're back to the fear of being ostracized. I think we can teach a child to have self-confidence by being good at judo, being cultured, etc. He doesn't have the latest trendy gadget. So what? Can we help support our child from the looks of others? He won't be the only one in the playground. He will be in the minority, but he won't be the only one. And if we stand firm, maybe there will be a few others, maybe a few other parents who are a bit too scared, who will be encouraged. So I think we must stand firm on this. My eldest son, he's 14 years old, and this summer I was very moved because he came to thank me. He said to me, "You know, Mom, I thank you and I thank Dad because you were really annoying with the screens. And actually, well, I've realized my friends are becoming idiots. You see, they're on Snapchat, they never do reading. Do you realize, Mom, everything they miss out on by not reading? And in fact, he is happy. He reads plenty of books that we have read, and we are thrilled to talk about them with him. And he is proud to have general knowledge. He is proud to be quick-witted in discussions. And not having the latest cutting-edge smartphone, he doesn't care at all. And it doesn't prevent him from having friends. Which means that in the end, he will have sufficiently intelligent friends anyway. To not be chosen solely based on non-criteria, namely trends and belonging.
Especially since now we also know there are significant impacts on brain development, for example, from screens, especially before 3 years old. And regarding this, the recommendations in this area are very clear. Well, the system, the brain develops until 24 years, but obviously the brain of a baby, including its nervous system, central, and its ophthalmic system,
are extremely immature. So honestly, exposing a child under 3 years old to a screen, I'm not afraid to say it, it's downright criminal, but the parents don't know, but it's downright criminal. That is to say, at the level of the synaptic connections at the level of vision development, at the level of wake-sleep rhythms. It is very, very, very disruptive. In fact, a child needs natural light. They need to develop motor skills with a vision of their environment in 3D. And when they are exposed to screen lights, tablet devices are even more so because tablets and phones are very close to the eyes. So it's extremely harmful. If at 6 years old you watch a cartoon while your mom takes a shower with a screen that is very far away, where there are no advertisements, and where the images scroll very slowly, there is no drama if it's for a very limited time. But when it is prolonged with images that pass very quickly, there is a hypnotic effect. It's really a hold-up on the brain. There is a hypnotic effect, and so these are children who are cut off from their bodies. They are cut off from their appetite. They don't know when they're hungry or not. They are cut off from their sensations. And so, in fact, we go against the autonomy we seek. We want the child to learn to know when they are hungry, when they are not hungry, when they are tired, when they are not tired. That's the whole challenge with a small child. But if you are sleepy, the screen prevents that actually, because it disconnects him from his body. It completely disembodies him. So afterward, he's super aggressive. He's like a lion in a cage. He's extremely irritated. If you add sugar on top of that, then it's a complete bowl of cereal and tablets.
He becomes
bowl of cereal
aggressive.
and tablets. You have an attention disorder. And then they come to see you. They tell you to give them Ritalin. No, you remove the tablets, remove the sugar, and your child will be
Yes,
calm.
that's what I was saying. It's a vicious circle. That is to say, the child then becomes aggressive. So they give him a tablet again because he becomes
Of
independent.
course, as a result, there are false diagnoses, meaning that attention disorder is a real condition that exists, but it is overdiagnosed with children who take medication when they wouldn't need it if the environment was suitable. And a young child, yes, it's tiring, but they need to move a lot. He needs to have real interactions that engage his body and his five senses.
How can we recognize the long-term effects in adulthood that behavior like this in front of tablets, etc., when we are young children can generate?
So it's overall, like actually the problem with the screen is that it activates the reward circuit that works with dopamine, with what we call very short-term rewards. When you scroll, you constantly have novelty, very, very quickly. It's an incredibly faster and easier reward than the reward of playing a tennis match and trying to win against your opponent for 2 hours. We agree. So, you have cheap dopamine, low cost reward, in quotes. So, it creates people who are addicted. They will need a level of stimulation, constant novelty, to stay afloat, to have minimal well-being. So there will be no patience, no tolerance for frustration. These are people who will often feel empty, often feel sad or joyless, who will be addicted, who will need a lot of stimulation, who will not tolerate boredom, whereas in fact a child without a screen gets bored for 5 minutes, and after 5 minutes they make up a story or build a hut. After 10 minutes. But boredom is extremely important, and in fact today's parents are often afraid that the child will be bored. But if the child does not get bored, his imagination is dead. If he is always in the factual, in the concrete, he can't invent anything. So it often creates adults who are somewhat listless, addicted and rather anxious, because they constantly need to be nourished by the outside world, having had no time to develop their inner selves. And generally, this addiction extends to other areas. So it can also be, in parallel, an addiction to cannabis, or an addiction to porn, or an addiction to consumption, or an addiction to alcohol, etc. That is to say, the addictive phenomenon, as it engages the same brain circuits, will multiply and manifest in multiple areas.
And regarding empathy, does that change anything?
The more you are disconnected from your emotions, the less you connect your empathy, naturally. And then, moreover, if you are exposed by screens to violent content, which happens quite quickly, thanks to algorithms, either violent content or violent content, from war, aggression, etc., harassment or pornographic content, since it breaches you and you cannot process it when you are young, you will have phenomena of identification with the aggressor. And today, 50% of young people who consume porn tell you that they repeat the violent acts they watch. because they are completely cut off from their capacity for empathy. So in fact, they don't metabolize it. They swallow it whole and then regurgitate it whole. And that is what's extremely worrying.
And what about video games in that context? Because some say that video games are good for brain development. I recently read that again in a well-known local newspaper.
So the studies are biased, okay? That means that, in fact, we make believe, because not everyone has studied brain development, that thickening of the cortex means one is more intelligent. So, gamers, a certain type of game, will overdevelop a certain skill.
Which
is absolutely not transferable. Well, depending on the game, in fact, the skill that will be developed by the game will be very, very developed in the gamer. It is not transferable. It will not be useful in their work. It will not be useful in their emotional life. First, it is not transferable. Next, the fact that there is a thickening of the cortex does not mean one is more intelligent. On the contrary, intelligence develops when there is a process of pruning. That is to say, naturally, your brain. In fact, nature is very intelligent. The brain will eliminate connections that are useless. So obviously, the more you strengthen a pathway, by repeating the activity, the stronger this path becomes. But if there is no pruning of unnecessary paths, there is no intelligence. In fact, there is a repetition of the same, but it's not intelligence. And the studies are biased because video game sellers make you believe this game will develop such skills for future pilots. But actually, it's just that as the child or adolescent repeats the same thing, they will strengthen a skill that won't necessarily be transferable at first. And then the thickening of the cortex is more a phenomenon of desensitization and not of intelligence.
So in fact, intelligence also comes from general brain plasticity.
Absolutely. Hence the importance for a child of doing many activities, doing small household tasks, doing things at school, engaging in activities in nature and playing sports. This multitude of activities is inevitably reduced if they spend time in front of a screen.
which was a given for our grandparents eventually. And today, it seems we have to relearn all that in a way. That has become aware of it since our parents, grandparents. It was natural. There were no screens, so people played, children played. Now that's no longer the case, so we have to become aware of this whole process again, in fact.
Yes, and I think we really have to tell the parents, your child, no matter how small, is not stupid. A child is fragile. He is not stupid. And a child can... When you do your household chores, obviously a mom or dad coming home from work still has things to do at home. They are not necessarily going to spend the evening playing with Lego. But there's no need to isolate the child. The child will not develop by being in front of the TV while the parents do the laundry or cook. The child will develop by being in the kitchen on a suitable seat that protects him or with clear instructions if he's able to move, but he must not have access to certain dangerous things, and by participating. My children, my youngest, are 4 years old, they unload the dishes. Obviously, they don't put away the knives, but the plastic containers, they can put them away. There's no danger. And so the child should be included in domestic life, actually. They can cook. So you don't put them in front of a pot of boiling water, but they can be with you peeling fruit at the table to make a dessert. So actually, the idea is that the child is part of the family.
And reintegrating him into our household tasks is extremely important.
And then you talked about pornography earlier. So indeed, pornographic sexual content online is very accessible today. Even some social networks like TikTok showcase very young women who are barely dressed. In short, everything is very accessible. What impact does this ultimately have on children and on society in general? Could you clarify this a bit?
Well, first on the psychological level, there is an intrusion with an escalation that requires going further and further, earlier and earlier to be accepted. And so this breaks in these young people the sense of respectability for their own body and for the body of others. The body becomes a commodity like any other. Interchangeable and which is from which we are dissociated, that we put on a stage. So there's no longer any notion of modesty or respect for one's own body, but there's also a complete erasure of the erotic imagination. In fact, sexual fulfillment, the pleasure of physical encounter, relies on fantasies, and these fantasies are based on an imagination, on something that has been sheltered from too crude intrusions by reality. Seeing naked bodies devalues the body, whereas being able to imagine how the one you're writing to, the one you're waiting for, the one you desire, etc., looks has encouraged the emergence of fantasies and thus a subjectivity, an erotic imagination that will make the romantic relationship unique, and which will make it beautiful and which will make it exciting and attractive. The problem of overstimulating them with very crude content, there is an incredible dullness. What could be poorer in terms of a storyline than a pornographic film? It's of absolutely incredible poverty, it's deadly boring. There's no humor, there's no imagination, there's no poetry, there's no novelty, there are interchangeable orifices, it's surgery, it's barbaric surgery. So it's very intrusive for them. And besides, it's not unrelated to the fact that the current generation makes love much less.
That's interesting indeed.
Because there is no more room for fantasy. Reality takes over, the porn film replaces the erotic novel where I could imagine something, where I could fantasize, where I had to wait. They no longer have time to wait, they are no longer allowed to wait. So as a result, there is no more desire, because desire is born from frustration. If there is no longer any sense of lack, there is no more desire, there is no more imagination. And so they do not make love anymore. And they have an extremely degraded view, both of their body and then of sexuality and of the other.
And at the societal level, what is the impact of pornography?
I think the scale of the pornographic phenomenon, because it is an addiction for many men, before being the cause of something, is for me the consequence of a real disease in the West, which is the disease of the symbolic. And besides, it's the spiritual disease, the symbolic disease, you know, that results in so many depressions and reliance on psychotropic drugs to hide, as best as we can, a deep existential malaise. That is to say, everything that allowed humans to sublimate their impulses, to connect, to have a society where there was a form of courtesy, not necessarily when we weren't obliged to like people, but there was a form of courtesy and respect, some social cohesion, symbolic spaces, art, and ultimately it's this sickness of the symbolic for me necessarily leads to isolation, necessarily leads to addictions, also leads to sectarian drift, credulity, also leads to a radicalization of discourse. We can no longer disagree. In fact, we are necessarily upset. And so it's a homogenization. It's a uniformity in the relationship to the body that degrades sexuality into something brutal and completely desexualized. I always tell my eldest son, pornography. It's anti-sexuality, because sexuality is about the connection between two people who appreciate, love, respect each other, and have the desire, giving each other pleasure. Pornography is about masturbating with the body of the other. It's the anti-connection. So actually, we are alone in pornography. And it is very sad to see, by the way, that men addicted to pornography can no longer touch their wives because they can no longer relate to a normal relationship. They identify with jackhammers. Let's put it that way. And they also have a very degraded view of the opposite sex. So I think it's a symptom. The place of porn is a symptom not only of ketosis but of this disease of symbolism. We can no longer have the imaginary support that allows us to disconnect. We can no longer have imaginary supports that elevate us in our impulses, in our desires, which are not bad in themselves, but are diverted towards things that relate, for me, more to the death drive than to the life drive. And sexuality should always be on the side of the life drive.
And what about sex education in very young children's classes?
It seems, moreover, that it is increasingly younger. From kindergarten, 3-5 years old, WHO standards recommend starting before the age of 4. and they suggest addressing the topic of early childhood masturbation, pleasure, and the satisfaction related to touching one's own body. Here I am quoting WHO standards, or also the right to explore sexual identities.
So I have an extremely radical position, which is that I believe that
Education has no place in school, period. At school, it's about instruction.
including civic instruction to remind children of the rules of life in society. And you don't humiliate, you don't mock someone based on their skin color, their height, their weight, their gender, their religion, of course, or their sexual orientation, of course. Civic instruction, education, it's at home. That's it. So already there's a problem. When you call a subject education, there's a problem. When you call a ministry national education, there's a problem. It's instruction, it's knowledge. Education is something more global that pertains to the family sphere, whether it pleases our ideologues who wish to transform man and the West or not. Increasing it, that is in reality, diminishing it in its subjectivity has no place. And actually in France there is a law from 2001 that has been completely misused. The idea was to combat addictions to porn, sexual abuse and harassment based on sexual orientation or sex changes. Once again, you teach biology on one hand, civic education on the other. You solve the problem. You shouldn't have to put it into the mind of an 8-year-old child that they can ask their parents to become a boy when they are a girl, and vice versa. You create confusion, because you are talking about something intimate in a public space. School is a public space, so there is no need to talk about intimacy to begin with. It makes them uncomfortable. Then it bypasses parental authority, because parents know their children, and according to the sensitivity of the child, there are children who will ask questions sooner or later. In adolescence, it also depends on the timing of puberty. There are girls who develop at 10 years old, and there are those who are still not developed at 14 or 15, so questions will also arise with physical development. And we know that the growth of a child is so variable from one child to another that we cannot standardize an age group like that by school level. So there you go then. When we truly understand the child's development, the stages of the child's emotional development, we can clearly see that it goes against all scientific knowledge. In fact, a child is not a being onto whom we can project our adult sexuality. Less quantitatively, it's rather different qualitatively, a child and an adult. We project our genital sexuality. The child is in the realm of sensory experience, exploring their body. Of course, a little boy in the bath can have an erection at 3 years old because the stimulation of the water causes his sex to change. But he will ask a question, he will say what is happening, and it's the role of the mom or the nanny or the dad or the big brother to say, well, it's normal, you are stimulated, but don't worry, your willy will return to normal. It's not at school. Talking to 4-year-olds about pleasure, enjoyment, masturbation, what kind of madness is this? We are violating children. And to do what Ferenczi called the confusion of tongues, which for me is a sexual abuse, it is on this confusion of tongues that all situations of control and incest rely. We are confusing adult language, which is the language of sexuality, with the child's language, which is the language of attachment and tenderness. The child needs bonds of attachment, needs to trust, needs tenderness. But he is not yet genitalized. He has not reached maturity. So to talk to him about sex change, pleasure, ejaculation, for a child who does not even have the physical means to understand what this experience is, it is just abominably violent. And it is no surprise that cases of children sexually assaulting other children in school bathrooms increase once these programs, as they are designed, are implemented. Today, as they are proposed today, by the way, the law was so distorted that we were supposed to fight against porn, addictions, etc. There is not a word in these programs about what addiction is. On the other hand, on sites funded by public money, therefore taxpayer money, where they are neither informed nor consulted, well, 11-year-old children can have access to practices they would have had plenty of time to discover by themselves with the person of their choice when the time would have been right for them to do so.
How do you allow a child to identify sexually inappropriate behavior from an adult, etc., if it is not discussed when they are young? In the case where they have an abusive family,
In fact,
or where things aren't all rosy, where they don't have access to asking questions to an adult, etc.
It is not by talking to the child about oral sex and other sexual practices that you will protect them from abuse. You will already be abusing them, meaning you will overwhelm them with something that they are not mature enough to comprehend. And so as they have heard about it, they even risk, when an adult wants to practice it with him, to say, oh, well, yes, I know, or well, let me try, or well, it's new. Oh, but I was told it was for pleasure, because sometimes the content is for pleasure. One can lick the boy's testicles. How does hearing that at school protect this little girl?
That's in the text.
On the other hand, we receive testimonies from parents telling us, my daughter had this in class, the school nurse or the person giving the sex education class, because we don't know that it's not the teachers who are well trained specifically on how to prevent abuse. It requires training by a psychologist. In fact, it's often activists from associations.
That are ideological.
And the parents are not aware that an activist from the association is going to enter the school, even though they are ideologically oriented. But they have the right to think what they want, but they should not replace that with a school program. So if you want to protect your child from abuse, it is simple. Words must be spoken as soon as possible. I did it as soon as my children were in the bath, and we talked when they were 1 year old, 1.5 years old. I started explaining to them, this is your body. Your body belongs to you. No one has the right to touch your body. Even the doctor must ask you. There. So when we went to the pediatrician, I was always next to them. I was the one who undressed my child, who explained the doctor's actions to them, for example. And you tell your child no one has a right to touch you without your permission. And anyway, an adult does not have to touch you, except if it is for a medical act, but with the permission of daddy and mommy. And you do not have to if when a child of a certain age touches your chest, etc. There is a moment when it is no longer a baby at the breast. You have to tell them, no, you cannot touch my chest like this. Do you understand, you ask? And when you ask the child, can I give you a hug? Well, you teach the child respect for their body. And so you naturally teach them what consent is, and also respect for the other person's body. No, you don't pull my clothes, you don't touch my bottom when passing behind me, and you teach them little by little. And in fact, they learn it naturally. There's no need to tell them about the Kama Sutra, actually. Respect for the body is something that happens, if only, by not forcing him when he's eating, by not insisting when he says he's not hungry anymore. You see, the respect for the child's perceptions is already a form of immunity against sexual abuse. So it is not a lesson where we show him positions that he is not even at an age to understand, telling him it will protect him from missteps, that it will protect him from perverse adults. We are ourselves a perverse adult when we do that.
Why do you think people promote this kind of content for younger audiences?
So for some, because they are completely unaware of the stages of a child's development and think they are doing the right thing. They believe it's progress. They think the main argument is, oh, well, would you prefer they discover that on porn sites? Well, it's better for the school to teach them. So that's it. Let's traumatize them before they traumatize themselves. So there is a part of ignorance, stupidity, of people who encroach on areas where they have no expertise. There are people who do political communication who have no understanding of pediatrics or emotional psychology and probably haven't taken care of their own children much. And then there are ideologues who think it's good and that we're going to create a new man, and that it's a very good thing, and who themselves are certainly manipulated in part by lobbies who know that behind gender transition, sex change, etc., there's a colossal amount of money to be made. I mean, the market for puberty blockers is a lucrative market, and again, it's totalitarianism, because it means that the bodies of our children is a commodity intended to make a profit. It's a form of totalitarianism.
And precisely, you make a connection between this sexual education and some young people's desires to change sex. Do you think there is a link, or is it, in a way, the entire educational environment of the child that leads to this?
I think it's the whole societal environment that contributed to making it a trend. At one time, fashion was elephant pants. Now, fashion is changing gender. We're not cool if we don't feel like it. But being uncomfortable in your skin during adolescence, being uncomfortable in your body because it's not changing the way you want, because you don't look like the parents you want, because you have pimples, because you're too tall, because you're too short, that's normal. Honestly, I wasn't happy to be a girl when I was a kid, given how my mother treated me as a girl. Nevertheless, the role of the environment is to help the adolescent get through this phase of discomfort and to show them examples of inspiring adults of both sexes to demonstrate that one can be happy to be a woman and happy to be a man, and that full and complete satisfaction can be found, and that as for the disadvantages it represents, we will fight. And it is certainly not about taking action in a psychopathic manner by irrevocably and irreversibly engraving what was once an expression of psychological suffering in stone. This psychological suffering must be heard. It must not be fixed. There you go. And there are gender dysphorias. They appear between 1.5 and 4 years old. They are extremely rare. There have been transgender individuals in all societies. Now, it is absolutely not normal that in just a few years the requests have increased tenfold for an act that, once again, leaves room for some to regret, despair, suicide attempts. It's always the same. We are in a society so ideologized that we can only present one side of things. We can only present the advantages of abortion. We cannot also present the risks. What would be scientifically honest is to say there is this progress that exists, there is this possibility that exists. So these are the risks. This is what also happens with people who transition. Here are those who will attempt suicide. Here are the testimonies of those who regret it. And there could be informed consent. But in fact, we are turning it into a trend, which is terribly cynical.
We often hear that if the number of gender transitions has increased significantly, it's because before it wasn't possible to do so socially. People were frowned upon, etc. So people didn't do it. And now that it is more accepted, those who were potentially in the wrong gender, etc., are coming forward and want to transition.
Yes, but once again,
etc.
true dysphorias manifest themselves between 1.5 and 4 years. And I don't think that in the new candidates for sex change, there aren't that many, truly have this feeling of not being born in the right sex only between 1.5 and 4 years old. It came to them much later due to societal pressures and trends, which are often expressions of a discomfort. There is a lot of people who want to change sex, who have experienced sexual abuse, and for whom changing sex will be a form of protection against a new risk of rape. These people do exist, but it's frowned upon to say it. And then I am not sure that progress for a human being is to change the rules of the human condition. In fact, omnipotence, the human being is not meant to be all-powerful. The human being is meant to exercise their freedom within coordinates they do not choose. They do not choose their era, they do not choose their country of birth, they do not choose their parents. Their freedom is what do I do with what is imposed on me. It is not I am all-powerful, I am God, and I renegotiate the conditions of my existence. That is not human freedom. Human freedom is not the absence of constraints. That is an adolescent definition of freedom. Freedom is what do I do with what I did not choose.
And today it is perhaps all the more striking that in some countries these gender transitions can be Without the parents' consent, meaning that if the child wants to do it, the parents cannot object.
It goes beyond that. The parents can be prosecuted.
Still, it is
Well, yes.
at an age where, in fact, children are not capable themselves of having, since they are not yet adults, as you were saying, they have not yet fully developed.
But above all, they are not given time. In fact, what's very psychopathic about this logic is that we don't want to accept that by nature, human desire fluctuates and that we need to give a young woman time to not want a child without requiring her to have her tubes tied. You have to give a young person time to feel uncomfortable in their own skin and listen to it without indifference and without violence either. Without rushing, without hastily opting for a short-circuiting of his psychic suffering that can no longer process, that can no longer transform. He is deprived of the freedom to transform in other ways, in art, in many things actually, in intellectual creation. And in fact, there is this very 0-1, very binary tendency to want to act on things. But I think it's normal for a girl of 17, 20 years old not to want children. Then at 35 years old, maybe she will want one actually. If her tubes are tied, she has no chance. So I believe the role of adults is to have enough maturity, wisdom, and calm to say, but yes, your desire, it is what it is. And even if you wouldn't bear to hear that it will change, deep down I'm going to give you the possibility that this desire, it changes. That's what is beautiful in a human's life. There are stages in life, there are cycles. And we are not the same at 50 years old, at 30 years old, at 12 years old. And actually, if we freeze things, we prevent desire from unfolding.
You were talking about puberty blockers and an expanding market. In your practice, have you faced pressure to promote this type of transition, or in any case, somehow push these practices?
Oh, well, not for me, because I practice privately. I choose the people I work with. And if something goes against my ethics, well, I don't do it. So I'm not approached by labs, I'm not a doctor, I don't prescribe, so no, I haven't received any pressure.
But you know whether it's done or not?
I know that today doctors, especially doctors, yes, have mandates. Ultimately, disobey the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. But aren't we harming a child in full puberty by accepting, without the parents' permission, to perform certain surgical interventions? I think there are real ethical questions that arise.
You were talking about the willingness or not to have children. Well, in the West today, a large number of people no longer wish to have children. Well, what do you think about that?
Yes, so there is this movement. I remind you that the Tavistock clinic in England was closed.
What was that clinic?
There was indeed a big scandal over transitions. There was indeed a scandal because it was considered that these were experiments. Children were used as guinea pigs. These were truly barbaric scientific experiments. So, what was your question?
On the question of this loss of desire to have children.
Yes, there is the No Kids movement. And there is the child-free movement. That is to say, the child-free basically say, I don't want the hassle, it's expensive, it takes time, it's exhausting. I want to be able to sleep in and travel whenever I want. So they fully embrace the notion. I want to play without hindrance, and a child is an obstacle to enjoyment. That's for sure. A child is a school of frustration. You have to work on yourself when you have a child. In the end, the hardest part is not managing the child, but managing your own emotions and the fatigue it generates. So having a child requires maturity. And then there are the no kids who carry the ecological banner. So they say, well, no, we are too many. Climate change requires that we do not have children if we want to save the planet, which is actually a bit like a vicious circle. Because if we want to improve the planet and ensure it doesn't burn, it's precisely to pass it on. So it's like people who stopped living to avoid dying during COVID. If, in the name of preserving the planet, we are jeopardizing the preservation of the species, it's completely absurd. I think that true ecology is a global ecology. Humans are part of ecology, human health is part of ecology, and ecology is part of human health. I believe there has been a lot of influence from the idea of living without restraint. A child demands a colossal effort and self-work. And then the child requires us to accept that we are dependent. It's too hard to have a child alone. So you need to be two. So we have to support each other. So we have to team up again, and so it poses an obstacle to the ultra-individualistic consumer society, where I am competing with my partner because I want to succeed like him. And we do not accept temporarily sharing tasks. So I think there is this very individualistic ideology, and then that the less a society is spiritual, the less hope it has, the more it is in a narrative of permanent crisis, economic crisis, ecological crisis, health crisis, the less hope there is. When there is no hope, we don't project ourselves and we don't want to pass on a world we no longer believe in. So if we are in immediate satisfaction, it's because we are in fact desperate. We no longer believe in something great. So we no longer want to pass things on, we no longer want to create a family.
Where does this feeling of self-flagellation and despair in the West come from? Because it seems like this is quite recent. Well, at least maybe several decades, but in any case, it's something quite new, this feeling. Some ecologists even want humanity to extinguish itself, certainly, but for it to extinguish.
It's the sickness of the symbolic, meaning the expression of the death drive, the expression of Thanatos. Happens when Eros can no longer bind and contain the destructiveness inherent in humans. Human nature hasn't changed. And in human beings, there is a constant conflict between the life drives that move towards connection, towards creativity, towards others, and the death drives of self-destruction, depression, self-flagellation, etc. And actually, when there is symbolism, when there are frameworks, when there are satisfactions that go beyond immediate pleasure, fears can be contained and we can overcome them. When all that is gone, the human being is facing their anxiety without help. We no longer have the recourse of Greek tragedy. We no longer have all those things that allowed us to work through the great fears of the human being. So we are directly faced with anxiety. The end of the world, of permanent catastrophe. And so instead of saying, well, yes, there are dangers on Earth, but that won't stop me from having children. I will try to protect them, arm them, equip them, and go for it. We take fewer risks and become extremely risk-averse. So in fact, either we have faith or we are afraid. Either we have faith in something or we give in to fear. But in both cases, it's irrational. Humans are irrational. Either they believe in something good or they submit to their fears and anxieties about something bad. And so I think that today we give in to fear in many areas instead of saying, yes, there are difficulties, but we will solve them together.
It's true that some parents, many parents, might also be afraid of parenting, meaning not being up to the task, perhaps due to personal trauma or the perspectives it can bring, difficulties in raising the child, and ultimately not feeling capable of meeting the child's development and needs.
No, but that is why, generally, the ecological argument does not hold. And when you dig into someone who tells you, yes, but it's climate change, in fact, when you dig deeper, you realize 9 times out of 10 that this person hated their childhood. And in fact, what terrifies her is that her child might be unhappy and being a bad parent. Well, therapy, introspection, that's exactly it. Introspection is the tool that allows us to free ourselves from our fears. That is, to identify our traumas, to identify our fears and say, well, I'm not going to submit to my fear, I'm not going to submit to my trauma as an abused child, etc. I'm going to overcome it. and allow myself to rediscover my desire beyond my fear. Of course, having been an abused child, I was very afraid of becoming a mother, terribly afraid. But psychotherapy and then the meetings allowed me to overcome this fear and to know whether my desire was truly to have a child or not. And in my case, I realized that once the fear was swept away, yes, I had this desire. But if I had stayed in fear, I would never have discovered my desire. And so I think that for a certain number of people who don't want children, actually, if we could heal the fear, if there was a true introspective approach, maybe a certain residual number would say, well, no, I still don't want a child. Okay, that's perfectly fine. I'm not into proselytizing. I mean, I'm not an ideologue pushing for pronatalist policy. But there would also be many who would say, well, now that I'm no longer afraid, of course, I want to love this being and cherish and educate them and experience this encounter with an absolute otherness, since a child represents absolute otherness.
And in the end, it's a natural process to give life, to bear a child, to educate a child. And that perhaps we forget.
Yes, but in the technical and modern society, we do something, it's almost like a sickness now to be pregnant. You have monitoring every 3 minutes to check that the child is okay, except the monitoring every 3 minutes causes contractions. So we have also complicated natural processes. And by the way, there's a swing back. More and more women tell me, I'm going to organize my delivery at home, because in fact they do not want there to be a hold of the medical field, technology or politics over this moment, which is a moment, it is both the moment of incarnation and a mystical moment for a woman. And I am sad when I hear very negative descriptions of childbirth. Of course, there are difficult, painful, traumatic births, because obstetrics can be violent, but it is also an event. In a woman's life, there is a before and an after. Bringing into the world, but bringing into the world. I am the channel through which the incarnation of a small soul will pass. It's totally incredible. I feel incredibly lucky compared to you. I can bring into the world, I have brought into the world. And frankly, the births of my 3 children are moments that I absolutely do not want to describe as painful moments. Well, yes, we can imagine it's tiring, yes, indeed, but it's so much more than that. It's so incredible. I almost want to say it's a moment that gives faith to someone who doesn't believe in God.
So perhaps the last question I wanted to ask you, which is a broad question indeed, it might be necessary to see how to synthesize the answer, but how to be a good parent in the 21st century practically.
Well, if you had
some advice,
if I had the answer, my children would be very lucky. How to be a good parent? I don't know. I don't claim to know. How to be a good enough parent in the sense of Winnicott? I think it starts with remembering that if we are slightly interested, because we are our children's parents, we are still the most capable to support them. And we must trust ourselves, and that it is not the politician, the pediatrician, or the teacher who knows better than we do. If we are interested in our child, if we are intellectually honest and do introspection on our fears, on the education we received, on what we want to keep from it, on what we don't want to keep. We are capable of connecting with our child, and our child will communicate what they need. Before I had my eldest son, I had no experience with babies. But actually, a baby knows how to show their mother what they need. So we really need to trust in the bond and that direct connection. Without letting it be intruded upon by advice, that's really troublesome. The advice to young mothers. That's why I don't want to say that I have the answer. So to rebuild trust, do introspective work. Really? Confront with the father or the mother our educational project and the fights we want to take on, because we're not going to be able to take on every fight. I chose that food, screens, sleep, things like that, were battles that were non-negotiable, because I know that the quality of what my child eats, the quality of his activities, are things that will be crucial for his health and development. But those are my battles. And one can choose others, but you have to choose your battles. And I believe that right now, the real urgency of the time is precisely to give walls back to the home. Your home is sacred. So you don't have to be embarrassed about what you want to convey to your children. It means that ideology stays outside. And the best psychological immunity you can give your child before they go exploring the world without you is education and freedom. It's good to teach them to say yes, but I think it's urgent to teach them to say no. No to mind-numbing and infantilizing advertising, no to marketing, no to propaganda. And this immunity, you will get it by spending time talking with them, teaching them to build their thinking. So with there you go, they need to read, they need to critique what they read, they need to ask questions. Don't tell them you ask too many questions. We need to bother to answer their questions, even to tell them, I don't know how to answer your question, I'll look into it with you. And really this education, a discernment to exercise their freedom so they can make conscious choices about what is good for them or not. I think this is the best psychic immunity we can give them. It's not telling them what to think, it's really teaching them in real time, because they will live in a world we haven't known, just like we live in a world our parents didn't know. And so teaching them to exercise this discernment, I think, is very, very important today, because precisely, school doesn't do it anymore.
Marie-Estelle Dupont, we are reaching the end of this interview. We usually end with an open floor for our guests. So there you go, if you have anything to add.
Do I have anything to add? Perhaps a message of hope. I would like to tell parents who are very worried today that they can also embrace the exciting side of education again. And in fact, when you pay attention, when you have several children, you can clearly see they have different personality types. And there, it doesn't depend too much on either upbringing or genes, since they are in the same family. And yet, they will not show the same talents or the same tastes. And when you dive back into it, education is truly something intellectually fascinating, because it's almost like detective work. To find what our child is made for, where they need our assistance because it's more difficult for them. And there we create a bond, a connection that is extremely rewarding, with a very strong bond of trust. And I think that if our children know that no matter what happens to them, they can talk to us about it without being forced to. Of course, they have their secret garden. But if we can make them feel that no matter what happens to them, they can talk to us, they will find a trusted person at home, we will have achieved something very, very beautiful that will make us profoundly happy and satisfied. So it's not only difficult to be a parent, it's also something deeply nourishing.
Marie-Estelle Dupont, thank you for this interview.
Thank you.